Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We're back here in 2022. I had to go back and look just to make sure I got this right. This is officially episode number 58 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Got Scotty in the shop, and Dussex and Tasso are both joining us. Tasso's actually in the shop, but we've got him segregated out front. So the topic for this one is something that we've kind of talked about or bounced around as an idea for a while, and we're finally going to address it, which is, we kind of call it the $50,000 challenge. If you had $50,000 and that was your budget to get a car, to modify the car, and then race in a series for a year, what would you get? What would you do? Which series would you run in? How would you use those funds? So
it's not possible.
That is what we're going to go around and talk about today. It's not possible?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny. We bounced this around for a while, and then just today, as we were about to get started here, realized, man, that is a huge chunk of money to even have as the framework for this discussion. And putting it into that context is well, wait a minute. I mean, who's got $50,000 to just to sit there and go out and go racing? But right. Breaking it down, you think about it, it's well, I mean, if you're getting a car, I mean that is an investment in and of itself. And part of where we came up with this budget is to kind of at least give you enough wiggle room so that if you wanted to get something new, like nothing crazy, this is not 911 turbo or GT3 Cup car money, but something you had some ability to get a new car if that's what you wanted to do, and then give you some budget to modify the car if that's what you wanted to do. So it's thinking about it in that context and realizing hey, that is actually kind of what, even if it takes you a couple of years to put it all together, that might actually still be where you end up to go out there and go compete. That was kind of an eye opener.
I think there are a couple things real quick that are worth just setting out there before we even start.
Yeah.
One is that every single person on this podcast right now, none of us have ever had a $50,000 chunk ever in our, Ryan, you sold your house and went whole ham on being a professional race car driver, but for the most part, that chunk wasn't for a race car, right? So none of us have ever had a $50,000 chunk where we went, okay, we're going to go about this and go start this thing. Anything that we've accomplished so far, we piecemealed together over years and time, and a lot of elbow grease went into it to kind of stretch the dollars that we did have. So I think that's important to start out first, that we are literally all examples right now that yes, it's totally possible. The other thing I think we need to set out, right at the beginning here, is that there's a big difference between participating at an amateur level and then winning, and especially winning at a professional level too, right? So if you want to go join IMSA or something like that and go race in a GT class or something like that, no way, right? Even just
$50,000 is your budget per race,
for tires,
maybe not even that. Yeah,
right. So there's a big scale going on here. Now I would say that we've all competed successfully at an amateur level on a really tight budget, and so we're examples of how possible this is. And that's what I'm hoping we'll talk about here today is kind of, don't let these big numbers scare you. It's very possible to do.
Sure.
So,
well, but this is a hypothetical. Yeah. Hypothetically, we all have $50,000, which we don't. Hypothetically, you could go out and buy a car and then convert it into a race car and still have enough money to compete for a whole season. And hypothetically, I think I guess it really depends on what class you want to compete in, right? So you could go out and buy, say, a used BRZ, and then spend the rest of that money with tires and brakes and then entry fees, and then just race local NASA time trials. So you don't need a cage, you don't need a fuel cell, you don't need, you don't even need safety gear at that point. Sure, that could be done. But if you wanted to if you had to cage the car, if you had to put all your safety equipment, both for the car and yourself, and still compete, I mean, I think it would be, you'd be stretching that budget quite a bit.
All right. Who remembers the last thing that they said?
I was talking about the BRZ. One of the other things was I was like, if you wanted to compete in local NASA time trials, you could just go out and buy a used Audi RS3 and go run it. But I started looking, and the cheapest RS3 I could find is still like $53,000. So there goes the whole budget.
Well, so let's not skip ahead too far. So let's maybe start and go around and say, okay, what car would you get? Let's start there, because the car that you get and the series that you're going to compete in, those are the two biggest factors, I think, to where the budget is going to go. So Dussex, if you're going to get one of these cars, what are you going to get?
And so I did my research and tried to keep my price down, and I took like fuel economy into consideration, and of course, like looked at a car that would hopefully be competitive in a race series that I wanted to race in. And so if I'm looking at like an early, like 2013, 2015 FRS BRZ, which I found to be priced anywhere like over 100,000 miles, priced anywhere from like $8,000 to $12,000. So I just put mine at $10K for that, for a 2013 FRS, basically.
Okay. All right. Tasso.
And then wait, hold on. And what series would that be competing in?
So Club Track Rat with Grid Life.
Okay.
So Club Track Rat is like, obviously you're going to have some high horsepower cars, like upwards of like 250 horsepower, wheel horsepower Civics and set to compete against. But I think there's a lot of advantages in the chassis. And if you're going to put money into it, I think it's a good one to start with. And I think out of all the series you can compete in and what's allowed, I think that's the one that's probably has the most room to stretch your legs, So.
Well, and there's starting to be a growing number of classes built around the BRZ and FRS chassis. So you've got some options there.
Some future proofing in that chassis too,
Yep. All right, Tasso, what car would you get?
So I'm going to build for, and this is with, my own car is somewhere between a rally car and a hill climb car, and it kind of specializes in one. But if you stick to the naturally aspirated classes, there's a lot more crossover. So I'm going to build a car for either whatever open light is called these days, a naturally aspirated four-wheel drive rally car,
Okay.
or a naturally aspirated four-wheel drive hill climb car. And I'm going to get either, and this will depend, either like a early GD NA car, or a GC Subaru as well. And, get it with a salvage title. I'll get a wrecked 2002 NA Impreza, base model Impreza with a salvage title. So
what kind of prices did you find those available at? Because I feel like this is an interesting climate, and I wanted to make sure like that I didn't just like, I can get a salvage title BRZ for like $4,000 and like put an LS swap in it, and those are like $800 when really you can't find those cars, and LS swaps these days are insane because of the market,
Because everybody's doing
I think you see them under 4 digits with significant frame or body damage, and I'm okay with that. So
there are shells out there, especially if you go older, like into the mid 90s, and
I mean
GC.
There were other factors, but the last bug eye shell I got was free, right? So, but for other factors, sure, and there's other costs associated, but so right, I'll give $1,000 to find something with hopefully the subframes and maybe a serviceable motor. 5-speed is fine. R160. My suspension plane is pretty cheap, just STI coilovers. So that's why I kind of leaned more for the early GD than the GC. It's just for the ease of install of some of those parts.
Sure.
So,
all right, Scotty, which direction are you thinking?
I mean, I'm kind of with Ryan as far as going with just like the BRZ FRS style platform. And I mean, to keep it as cheap as possible, probably just running in, like a NASA time trial series.
Like TT4, TT5.
Yeah, something right around there where, I mean, again, you wouldn't have to spend a whole bunch of money on the safety equipment. And you should be able to use that budget to get to all the events for entry fees. I think that's the best way to go.
And so the direction I was leaning is similar to Tasso, is a 2-liter WRX sedan or wagon. I'm partial to the wagons, but I would take a sedan if I had to. But I would be looking for one with a blown engine. And because I know that it's all coming out, and I'm going to basically redo the drivetrain, the engine, and everything like that, but to compete in NASA time trials. And I thought about wheel to wheel, but the consumables cost in wheel to wheel potentially is much higher. And so that's where, like, time trials, for all the reasons that we've talked about, is a lot more attainable, even with what seems like a pretty modest budget that we kind of gave ourselves the framework to work within. And then, like with NASA time trials, it's power to weight, and so you've got a little bit more control of where your car is going to land in the competition that you're going to be up against within reason, versus some of these other classes like in global and grid life, where it's not really based on power to weight as much. There's like certain mods or tire choice that puts you in different classes, and then all of a sudden, like, you have to make 500-600 horsepower to be competitive in a lot of these classes, because just the rule sets are different, and like getting to that kind of power level and being competitive and reliable is a lot trickier.
Right.
Now,
I think some of the things that, and granted, after doing the budget, you see that there is considerably more room, but like, I love seat time, so that's where I'd be filling in the rest of the money and stuff.
Sure.
But when you look at, I try and avoid things that require like high safety barriers, where you have to have a roll cage, have to have fire suppression, have to have, hell, the market is insane right now. I mean, here, like, Brian's basic 6-point cages are costing $6,000 right now. And then you get into a rally cage, and I mean, it's almost like worth doing it yourself. But I mean, I know that there's personally limitations, and probably for our listeners too. I mean, installing coilovers is one thing, but Walden, like an FIA approved roll cage and your salvage title GC,
that's going to be that and a tow vehicle and trailer are going to be the big hits in my budget. So I've accounted for those, and
nice.
It's even, we're making a lot of kind of assumptions and allowances just for the purposes of this conversation, right? We've touched on it with the time trial stuff, but even on the dirt side, right? You could go race SCCA Rallycross right now in whatever car you have and spend $0.
Yeah.
You could borrow a DOT approved helmet and go pay $80 and go race SCCA Rallycross right now. So I set the goal for my budget to be full speed, all the gears are legal, safety intensive kind of race car. So
nice.
Something where you can touch shoulders with chem block,
right?
That kind of thing. So,
well, and man, it's the type of racing that you want to do. I mean, it's a really big factor. Just like, how modified does the car have to be to get competitive? Like, the kind of racing that you want to do, how much travel is going to be involved? Because that's, I think, when you start to get into trying to put together a series, you're not trying to go to an event, you're trying to put together a series of events. So like travel time, towing, all those things become these kind of like hidden or forgotten expenses that add up really quick. We're talking to Nigel before we started here, and he went out and did grid life for a season, but he was using a V8 gasoline powered vehicle to do his towing, and what he ended up having to spend on fuel shocked all of us. Like, it was way more than entry fees. It was a couple $1,000s in fuel to go out and back to a long, like a distant event. It's like, wow, like that's something like if you didn't even think about it, you just get on the road, you start driving, you're like, wait a minute, how much money am I spending on fuel? And you get halfway out there, like, wait a minute, what am I doing here?
My thoughts here too for my budget were included like go to Walmart, buy a tent, buy a Coleman camp stove, stuff like that. So
like hill climbs, that's you basically pit and camp in your pits. I mean that's just kind of the way a lot of people do it.
Which sounds like a joke, right, for the purposes of the budget, but for most of our races, we camp in our pit space. So
and I'm sure
I sleep in the truck or the trailer.
Yeah.
Regardless. So if it was a tent and a sleeping bag, that would work just fine also.
Yeah. Enclosed trailers make good tents.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't afford an enclosed trailer though. So
yeah. But it's, as you get into motorsports, I mean, these are all like little pieces to the puzzle that you have to consider, have to think about, especially if you're really going to try and put together a string of events. I mean, there's so much involved there.
That's usually a barrier cost to run national rally, right? It's usually not car prep or safety gear eventually once you get it, right? It's the cost of travel to New York and then Washington and then back to Missouri and then back to Oregon and then maybe stop by Colorado. And so it's, but that's, in real life, like outside of the conversation, that's why I do the hill climbs that I do. One of the main reasons is because they're all within a 3-hour drive or something like that of my house. So,
looking for something local or what is available local. I mean, that's if you don't want to be gone for significant amounts of time, like even just from a vacation standpoint, like, okay, I want to go out and I want to run in a season in a year, but if you got like 1 or 2 days travel on either side of the event, all of a sudden it's like, well, I go to one event, that's like 4 vacation days. Just got to one event. How much vacation do you have? Like, how feasible is that even?
So we should factor into this the cost of moving to Colorado.
So, the motorsports center of the United States. Yes.
Yeah. Motorsports hub of the northern continent.
Yeah. Well, and like we take for granted how many opportunities there are in Colorado for grassroots motorsports, but like for this conversation, it's definitely relevant.
Yeah.
So Tasso, what are entry fees for, let's just say hill climb? What are entry fees for the season?
They vary on the race and kind of how big of a race it is, but per events, usually like 180 to 250, and there's usually about 5 events. So call it 1250, something like that for that's a high end estimation for entry fees for a season of racing the hill climbs.
So, and like with NASA, if you did all the local events, and that includes like crossovers, if you go out to Nebraska or Utah or something like that, you're looking at about, between $3,600 to $4,000 just in entry fees.
Wow.
And that's for 8 events, right?
8 to 10 events. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's definitely something got to factor in as you're going to start putting together a season.
So out of $50,000, on the time trial side, you're already like, $3,500, $4,000 in. Yeah. Okay. That still leaves $41,000. It's
right.
It seems like a lot of money, but it's not when it comes down to like, man, the consumables, so
yeah.
You start talking about, well, you can't necessarily just drive your hill climb car, rally car to all the events.
I even have what you should buy for a tow vehicle ready. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to talk about it? You want me to take you through?
Yeah.
I can give you like even like a plan time wise, so you don't have to have it all at once.
All right.
And so by a year from now, you'll be racing hill climbs if you want to.
Perfect.
All right. So go buy a salvage or a no title wrecked NA, like a bug eye, something like that, right?
Yeah.
hopefully it runs still. Maybe it got like enough rear end damage that the insurance decided to total it or something like that, something that's not important. Or even if it rolled and the damage is mostly cosmetic but not structural, hell yeah, grab that thing. Start racing SCCA Rallycross right now in it. I mean, maybe you can't tow it because it's salvage title and that makes you uncomfortable or something like that. Fine. Go buy a half-ton Chevy pickup from, like the late 90s, early 2000s, and like a 16-foot open trailer with nothing on it, right? So we'll estimate high so you get a reliable tow vehicle you don't have to worry about, and call it 10 grand for both of those things. Yeah.
Sure.
And so say we estimate high on the vehicle as well, $2,000. So you're in 12 grand right there. And you're now racing. It's worth it to spend the money to get a comfortable helmet. So spend $500 on a helmet and you're going to use it for the rest of your time here as well, right? So you're in $12,500, but you're racing right now in a vehicle that is not your daily, and you're setting yourself up for success in the future, right? The big expense is going to be caging it, especially if you can't weld on your own. If you can weld on your own, sure, you still have to, materials cost and the consumables for doing that. So, give yourself $1,000. Yeah, give yourself $1,000 just in materials to make your cage. But we'll say you can't do that, and we'll even go big. We'll do $8 grand for an FIA cage, which is a lot. I know the market is different. I paid $2,500 for my cage because I decided, even though I can weld, that a safety thing, I wanted someone who really knew what they were doing, because I'm not going to joke around with safety, right? So you have a lot of stripping in your car, do all that work yourself, because there's a lot of that not only makes the car faster, but also will set up, your cage builder. If you give them a car with the interior already stripped out of it, they're going to charge you less because they don't have to take all your dumb interior pieces out too, right?
Yeah.
You got to go buy some seats. So I think I'm at like 20,000 right now, and I'm in a caged car with a tow vehicle, the car on the trailer, and we're already racing rally crosses. I'm not going to count those entry fees because you don't have to do that. So whatever, but they're like $80 a weekend or something like that. So we're at 20 grand right now. We have a caged car. Yeah, you got to get seats and harnesses. We'll say you want nice, comfortable, safe seats. So $1,000 a seat each, right? You get, wing seats on going to something like a halo seat, and then
with the head protection.
Yeah, $2,000 in seats, $1,000 in harnesses. So now we're at 23,000, and we have a caged vehicle with seats on a trailer with a tow vehicle.
Well, now you haven't done anything to the car yet, but like
why?
that is
why should I?
That's impressive. I was going to say that's impressive. That's impressive breakdown of the budget.
But so it's like right there, you got a couple extra safety things for ARA versus hill climbing. Like you have to have a master cutoff switch,
Fire suppression.
You got, and so right, ARA now requires a built-in fire suppression. We can still get away with mounted extinguishers for $20 each at a hardware store, right, for the hill climbs. So
and even some of the fire suppression systems aren't crazy expensive, like $500-$600.
Right. So maybe give it a slough 5,000 of safety features, which is a crazy high amount. But we've seen that especially a lot of rallies, the deciding factor in a lot of classes is just finishing the event, right? So there's a chance that you just take that car I just described, a stock ass car with some safety features, and you just putter around Rally Colorado, and you may end up winning the national version of your class, or at least the regional version of your class, right? Just for finishing. Now, you're going to get bored of that, right? So we'll go back to the hill climbs, just because it's a little easier safety-wise to build for stuff. Go get a set of STI struts with stock STI springs, like just a stock black STI spring on the STI, cherry red strut. I don't know what those go for nowadays. The last time I bought a pair, they were like $400.
Finding GD ones is going to be harder now because they're old.
Okay, well we'll go big, $1,000. You find a set.
Well, will the STI front shocks bolt onto the WRX hubs? Because you can. Does that limit you only to the 04?
Yeah, 04.
Okay.
Yeah, 04 STI is what you need. So 04 STI suspension.
So Field Fix Perch would be a good option here because like they're about $1,000. They would bolt up and you can actually get like some adjustable valving and stuff done.
Yeah. What I'm looking
like,
for
it's
is an inverted style strut because they're just that much stronger. And that's kind of your weak point there is bending
Sure.
the shock shaft.
Sure.
Even before you start bending the strut gears on the rear, because that's in your suspension, your weakest point, even with expensive suspension on like a WRX or whatever, like the GD or Subaru style suspension before they went trailing link or before they went to the whatever your suspension is called on your new cars, multi-link. The weak point is because the strut is offset with the hub in the back as it bottoms out, it tries to twist the strut like that. So that's always going to be a weak point. You have to kind of drive knowing.
No. Oh,
Man, the internet
The
said
STI
nope.
stuff,
oh, there he is. Okay.
yeah, the STI stuff is competitive. Like I won my first hill climbs championship on stock STI suspension, so it's fine. Run it. So I forget where we're at, 24,000 now with suspension in a racing car.
Another footnote to proof of concept here. Like, so Jeff Huser, when he was running his open lights car, gosh, would it be 2 years ago at this point? I mean, he was running a stock engine with it was like 150,000 miles on it. I mean, I think even Dave Brown,
He had
was
some nice
running
motors.
high mile. He had somebody started out running high mileage just
Right.
stock engines, and it basically just put
In
on
A motors
suspension.
too, though, right?
Yeah.
But even
Yeah.
my WRX I first started, it had 120,000 miles on it, and a lot of that was SCCA rallycross time. And then I hill climbed on it, and I even did a rally or two on that motor as well.
Yeah.
So
this is within reason.
the first championship stock STI struts and a stage 2 150,000 mile WRX 2-liter. So it's not unreasonable. I know you start getting really hardcore, you start like oil control issues come into play and stuff like that, but it's the cost or the complexity starts to just cascade once you start adding a thing. So don't even start going up that slope, right? Just stay here. You'll still be competitive if you're really on your game as a driver. You'll still be competitive. Maybe, if I show up and I can hold my shit together through a weekend in my much more modified car, in a turbo class, I'm gonna probably beat you. But in an NA class, there are the field is competing kind of at that level. There's competition at that level, so it's fulfilling. So
it's worth mentioning.
And from there,
well, it's worth mentioning for the NA rally car or rally class that you're describing, there definitely would be an advantage in getting a GC chassis versus a GD chassis, because the GC chassis are, I think they start off 400 to 500 pounds lighter when you get all the interior and stuff out than the GD chassis. So you're going to be able to make a GC chassis much lighter with the safety equipment and stuff that you're describing versus a GD chassis.
And even so, 04 STI stuff does bolt up. You got to play with top hats.
Yep.
So
rear top hats. The fronts are, I think, the same. The fronts are the same. So it's just the rears.
You got to spend a couple, but even those you can go get top hats used. I know they make Group N stuff and they make rally inspired and race quality. You don't need that stuff. You can run stock top hats for a season before they really start to fail. So
we're still on.
Go get some.
So we're still on the rollover tires, right? Like the tires that the car rolled over on, and that you did a season rallycross with.
Sure, right. So you can run your. Okay, so I'll keep adding stuff here. Yeah. Don't worry, I'm ready for this. Run OEM 15-inch wheels. You can go get them used. If you don't want to look around, you can find them easily used for like $80 a wheel. I used to find them for somewhere between $0 and $20 back when I used to run them. So get them the OEM alloy. No, don't run steel because steel will fatigue and bend. So run the OEM alloy 15-inch wheels. Get just a set of decent pads for your stock brake calipers. Porterfield R4, whatever Hawk 11, 27, 47B, whatever Hawk compound that is, or I don't know all the Hawk numbers. That's why
it'd be a DTC 30, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, DTC, Denver Tech Center.
Yep, the Denver Tech Center pads. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Whatever. So go get some decent pads. Find used rally tires. Especially the GCs, they want to run in the NA cars. Those much cheaper, like 165/70 or 165/65 on a 15 rally tires, and you can find those used. You got to look around, like join the Facebook groups, but I bet you find $120 a set of 4 tires, 150
Take
bucks.
us. Sure.
They're okay. They're not great. But again, the limitation for the car will probably be your driving skill, not the tires at first. So you'll get the nice sidewall, you get the good rubber compound. They're nice and strong. So let's see, for wheels and tires and brake pads, let's go big. Let's estimate $1,000, which is too big. Okay, you get 2 sets. Get 2 sets of wheels and tires, and just tie them down on your 16-foot trailer. Throw them in the trunk of the rally car on the way to the race. Right. So 24,000. Is that where I'm at now?
Yeah. All right. Now hold on. So we've talked a lot about this process. Because Scotty and Dussex talk BRZ. Let's kind of paint that picture a little bit.
You want to start there, Scott?
Hey, you guys are way more prepared for this than I am.
They took it.
I didn't even know we were really due until like really this morning. No, you go ahead, Ryan. You're prepared.
Well, so Ryan and Sky, just mindset wise with the BRZ, like, is your mindset to leave like power wise pretty much stock, because a lot of the classes for the BRZ are not for heavily modified power cars. Is that kind of where you're coming, like, with the build?
I mean, for me, yeah, bolt-ons. And another big reason too, because I feel like the engine and transmission are like a weak point in those cars, especially in the older ones, like the ones that I'm looking at, where they had those, some of them had those like retainer failures and stuff.
Right.
But I think for me, trying to find a class that you could be mildly or at least nearly competitive in, and then having a car that, because I tried to avoid the tow vehicle route. So like for me, the BRZ gets 30 miles to the gallon when you're on pump gas. So you can drive to the events on pump gas. And then I had mine set up basically to run E85 at the events. So, which it costs more money, not just in the E85, but in the complexity of the setup, because you have to have like the ethanol controller and the flex fuel setup so that it's safer to do it that way. But I mean, like the Delicious setup that they have, like the add-on for everything to make flex fuel work, where you don't have to change anything. You just put the different fuel in. It's like just under $600.
And that's Delicious tuning, just to be clear.
Yeah,
it's one of the main tuners for BRZs.
Yeah, and so that's kind of why I picked the BRZ. I mean, I wanted to stay Subaru a little bit. I think about, and a big part of it's because I don't know why they're not more expensive. I mean, BMWs are insane how expensive they are. BMWs are heavy. BMWs are complex. They can be faster, but the amount of money it takes to get there. I mean, I'm sure if you look at my Scott's build versus the other GTS cars we talk about, I'm sure Scott still has half the money in his car that they have in theirs, and so I felt like the BRZ is a good part to start out, and it's got long-term, I mean, people put VR motors in them out of Skylines. People put LS motors in them, put EJs, obviously. I mean, a bunch of other weird stuff. But so I feel like in a short and a long-term ratio, for the price, I think the BRZ in a time attack or like a road course setting is really hard to beat.
So that's with that platform, that's one of the interesting things about the BRZ is that the aftermarket support of that platform is so big. Like you're saying, there are kits to do a lot of things down the road. So like if this is the first year of competing and you wanted to go bigger, there's a lot of growth potential there. Now I would argue in Tasso's case with like say an open light rally build, the potential is still there. You could still, like, hey, I want to go open class and run a turbo engine. You could absolutely do that too.
Absolutely.
And
it's worth saying too, you mentioned it, I stuck Subaru and kind of 4-wheel drive because it's what I am and kind of what we're all about here. But you could similarly, right, get a CRX or, I don't know, a handshake and a high five maybe. Yep. And then you're going to burn through half as many tires and cut your costs down that way.
Yeah.
There was, I don't think it ever made it to our NASA group, but there was, for a while there was a big Civic class, like almost a spec Civic class in NASA, running wheel to wheel, kind of like your spec Miatas and kind of like what the GT86 Cup is trying to do as well.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why. And the other part is like those cars have a lot in them from the get-go that it doesn't cost a lot of money to make them. Like, you don't have to completely reinvent a car to make them competitive. So like take an EG Civic, right? If you bought, and I'm using that as an example because I'm sure that's one of the cars that dominates. You take an EG Civic and you have to do a K-swap. You have to do, different transmission. I mean, the complexity of what you have to change in like an older Honda, it's gonna be a lot more effort and changing a lot more things to make it as competitive as like a lightly modified FRS. It could be more competitive, but what's to say you didn't put that same kind of effort into an FRS, how much more competitive it would be, And that's in that TR class.
Well, then the other factor too is competition. Like, how big is the class? So like right now, like Dussex, you've been right there in scene, and Scotty, you as well. You've seen how many people are now running these BRZs in either time trials class or in the wheel-to-wheel class as well. And there's some other classes as well. Like, the idea of building a car and going out there to drive and working on getting faster and stuff, that's fun. But like, if you're going to be, especially if you're going to be running in a wheel-to-wheel class or competing, you don't want to be in a class by yourself. I mean, it's just like then you only have yourself to benchmark against, and so that makes it. That might work for some people. Some people might be perfectly fine with that. But if you really want to have a couple competitors that you're actually running up against and dicing, like the size of the field that you're building the car to compete in would be something you'd factor into.
For sure.
How viable? I mean, because Dussex, you mentioned it. Like, how viable is it to drive your race car to an event and then drive it back? Like, is this like, do we say that is viable?
I think if the car's not too complex, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nick Stinnifer did it with an S2000, and I think they're a lot weaker than BRZs in a lot of ways. I mean, they have like massive suspension failures that happen on them. You see them happen like almost at every event. There's an S2000 and we've seen Nick do it 2 or 3 times, where they have like rear hubs breaking. And but I mean, he drove all over the country, and that car's a little bit more compact than a BRZ. I would say less comfortable. And there are people who do that, who they might not travel as far as say Nick has traveled, but I think as far as like what you can cram in a BRZ, I mean, you can get a lot in there. I mean, some of these dudes go into these GT86s are bringing whole sets of wheels, whole sets of tires, everything, plus like a 10x10 canopy inside their BRZs. Like, it's crazy with what you can fit in them. So I think if you, I think with a little bit of like thought, I think driving across the country with it wouldn't be that hard. I do know that, and this is from Jeanette's experience, she took like a tire trailer with her, and it cut her gas mileage down. Like, she went from like 31, 32 miles a gallon down to like 24. So there are parts of that car that are really sensitive to auxiliary stuff. So the more you can get in the car, the more I think financially responsible it is. Now, if you're trying to take 2 people, I mean, that's obviously going to change things too, but I think it's definitely doable to drive across the country, I mean, and hit some of these events and do it in a car like that. And I would rather do that in a car like that than in an EG Civic too. I mean, a competitive EG Civic is like a fucking tin can. You're not going to have anything. Yeah. You're barely going to have air conditioning. You'll have heat, and that's probably it. And who knows how well that's going to work when you basically skip 2 generations of engines to make it competitive.
Well, and it's I would say that I think for road racing, it's viable. I mean, because we know people that have done it. It's viable. It's maybe like you've got to keep the power really low so that you're not going to like the chances of breaking something drivetrain related is little as possible. But it's viable. I think for rally or rallycross, it's possible. I've known plenty of people that have done it in rallycross, but I think for actually stage rally, just the risk to the car is too great. I think you really need a trailer and a tow vehicle. It could be done, but like
no, it's been done.
You hit a boulder though, and on stage, and now you're
Yeah. There's always a
processing
chance.
Yeah,
There's
but
a
I mean,
chance of wrecking the car. But there's a chance of wrecking the car anywhere, right? Cars have rolled
Right.
over at rallycross events. Cars have probably rolled at autocross, I'm guessing.
So let's just say that it's viable, but maybe not advised to drive
Yeah,
the car.
I
on
mean-
street
I think if
level.
you got a wagon, so when I was rallycrossing, it's not
He
quite.
really is trying to sell it.
And this
Wagons,
is even,
you could put
I
all
gave
sorts of stuff in a wagon.
$10,000 for a tow vehicle budget in my thing too, because
Yeah.
that's Gucci, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but get a AAA membership and go do it in your wagon and so I have a sedan, and when I was racing rallycross locally, no problem, right? But even like going over to the Western Slope for a national challenge one time in Grand Junction, it's like a 4.5 hour drive or whatever. I had my street tires. I had my, gravel tires. I had a full like floor jack toolkit, bags for me, some spares for the car, all that stuff just in the car.
Yeah.
And it was fine. It's,
Well-
not a very long drive, but there was nothing about that drive that said I couldn't have made it, further. And I had failures at the event too. And to some extent you can overcome small. I had a power steering line go just from vibration. So I have a belt that bypasses the power steering pump on an EJ. So it's just running the crank and the alternator. And I just drove home with manual steering after that. I lost some teeth in the rediff on that at that event.
Wow.
But I drained out the chunks of teeth and just went ahead and drove it home. It was fine. So, it's
Well-
what you're tolerant. It was really chunked out, like the course got railroaded, and so it was like the whole way through. And it's a stock viscous limited slip, so it only has 2 spider gears.
Yeah.
So I was breaking teeth off the spider gears, I went through. That was dumb.
Man,
but I was also
necessity,
running
as they say, necessity is
E85
the mother of
turbo
inventions.
power and trying to vie for wins in a
Right.
turbo class, as opposed to race for attrition in an NA class and rally too. So, but I know folks, especially with wagons,
Yeah.
and you throw your co-driver in. If you have headsets, which are great, then the noise isn't even that big a deal. They're kind of not really legal on the
Right.
road.
Right.
Technically you're not supposed to wear headphones when you're driving down the road, but you're also not supposed to drive on rally tires. And I happen to know medium and hard compound rally tires, they last a long time on the road because you're not putting any heat in them,
Right.
So I used to daily my race car, even after it was caged, and I wouldn't switch the gravel tires off. I would just, come home from an event, unload it from the trailer, park my sketchy ass pickup in the backyard, take some of the race gear out of the car, make sure the oil is good, and then drive it to work the next morning. So, it's what your tolerance is. You can absolutely do that stuff. It's what your tolerance is. And all of us have come through that scumbag phase of, racing at some point, right? Like I think it's an important step.
Well, it is because it's where the desire to compete, the desire to get out there, do it, is the deciding factor. It's like, okay, well, I can't do this. I'm gonna have to do without that, but I'm gonna do it so I can get out there and do what I want to do.
Right. But so I absolutely know folks, and it looks like a great program. If you're not going out there to go for overall or open class wins, and you're going out there for a regional NA 4-wheel drive competition. Yeah, get a GC wagon, throw your spares in the back, keep that thing running 85 or 87 octane, whatever is available in your area. Run used tires, put a skid plate on it, and don't hit boulders. Have a AAA membership. Go get it.
Well, and so just as a quick footnote back to driving to the events, I just want to say, so Scotty, you drove your STI to a lot of NASA events with spare set of wheels and tires and tools in the STI. And of course, it's like, I'm going to him. He's frozen. He's freaking.
Yeah, he's asleep.
But he did do that. But that's just another footnote of making that viable. Another point to what you just said, Tasso, that I think is worth mentioning is that there's a value in figuring out that you really want to do this. It's like having all of these really I don't know, like budget conscious choices that you're making, so you can go out there and actually do this, like in a lower powered car, etc. There's a really advantage in doing that for your first season, because you're going to find out, okay, do I really like this? Is this really what I want to do? What I want to spend this time and energy doing? Because then once you know that, then you can decide, okay, well, I've made this much of an investment, and I know that this is really what I want to do. Now, do you want to take it to another level? Do you want to reevaluate the build? Do you want to reevaluate your target, the class that you're going to compete in? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's budgetable too. That same GC cheap salvage title car, right? You take that car once you're, done running NA, and you saved up for a year or two more, or you have enough, points to, advance with the ARA and their classing system and stuff like that. And maybe you go spend $5,000 on a motor, $5,000 on a 6-speed swap, and $5,000 on suspension. And now you have a competitive, I don't know if they have like a limited all-wheel drive class that would fit, or an open class, right? And yeah, maybe you're not going to take down Travis Pastrana or some of the R5 cars that come kicking around, but that's not, no one is, unless you're coming from that good money.
And really, I mean, like, to try and compete in an open or an unlimited class, I mean, oh man,
right?
You're up against some massive competition. So like that is something that you really have to give some serious thought to, if that's what you want to.
But that's more than the budget that I have into my open class hill climb car, race and championship winning car as it is, right? Yep. And there's a lot, $5,000 for a motor. People are thinking to themselves like, well, IAG sells them for $400,000. Why is your motor only $5,000? It's like, well, it's not a billet block, and I'm not having someone else put it together, right? My buddy and I build my motors, and so that saves a lot of money. I've talked about this before. When I have to build a motor, I go on Facebook Marketplace and buy all the used short blocks I can find. And inevitably, some of them come with some good aftermarket parts. I spend $200 buying used blown up short blocks with, bad bearings or scored cylinder walls or something like that, right? And that's where I found pistons. That's where I found the last set of my forged pistons, and I found a good crank in another one. And then I had to splurge for some rods, but whatever. Yep. Then I had another block that was good, that it all worked out, and I developed a relationship with a machine shop to get that stuff done, affordably, and and so then it's not going to be a plug and play 800 horsepower motor, right? But you can put a little work in and have a motor that has some quirks and shortcomings, but you can overcome it. That makes 400 horsepower. So I want to throw out another observation here, which is, like, again, kind of what I mentioned at the beginning. This is a large sum of money that we kind of started playing with imaginarily here. But it's interesting that the class that we've all picked is something where it is basically a spec class where power is going to be limited. Power is limited, or you cannot really build power. And so it's worth mentioning that, like, even with this, like, imaginary large sum of money, like, the classes that we pretty much all have gravitated towards is all still a spec class. And I would say that the feeling I have for that is because then you have a chance of being competitive, and you're not going to be up against somebody that's making double the power that you're making, where all of a sudden you're not competitive because they've just gone way further than you have.
Yeah, their budget was bigger than 50,000.
Right.
Yeah, right. You avoid the classes where you buy championships. Right.
So, well, as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, hill climbs where it's like, if you're picking a series to run, I mean, looking at the rule set is really worth, like, looking at the rule set, and the better the sense you can have of what people are doing in that rule set and the cars that they're running, the better off you're going to be in hopefully picking the right place and building your car, putting your car in the class where you want to be.
Yeah, we're exposed by our rule set right now. It allows a bunch of scumbag innovation from guys like me, but somebody could come in with a $2 million budget and literally mop us up. So We are
It
a little
happens.
exposed by our open rule set. At the moment, it's not happening. But yeah, generally, a controlled rule set in a class that doesn't have like national payouts is going to be the cheap way to do it. Because once you get national payouts, then someone is going to be willing to lose $100,000 on winning that class that year because he's going to make $2,000 back. So
yeah. So there's one other point that I would make that I just realized as we were just having this conversation, which is we all pick Subarus, and
I
what
picked
I
a
would say is
Toyota.
you picked a Toyota. That's fair. Well, what I was
pick
going
the
to say is
Scion.
you go to what you know. You know, we all picked what we picked because we have a familiarity with it. You have this knowledge of like, well, if I can get this platform, it'll cost me this. You know, like you know where the weaknesses are, you know what needs to be addressed. You know, and if you're getting into a series, like kind of taking a moment to think about, okay, well, what platforms am I really familiar with? What have I driven? What do I know? What do I know that what platform do I know that has strengths and weaknesses? Like if you kind of come into it from a point of a known quantity car or known quantity chassis, that can be a big advantage so that you know what the issues are. You can actually keep the car running. You know what really needs to be addressed versus kind of going into something blind. Like I mean, I haven't talked a whole lot, but like there's a minute there because we've looked at like V8 M3s because they're reasonable. Like they're about half this budget, like 25, 27, 28. I mean, with the used car market right now, it's a little bit like it's skewed, but like for $25,000 to $28,000, you could get like a higher mileage V8 M3, which is kind of the bane of Scotty's existence in time trials right now. It's like, well, do you make that leap? And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, I don't know the platform. I don't know what the issues are. I have a BMW, and I'm aware that like a lot of things, like if they fail, it's more expensive to deal with than a Subaru is. Like a Subaru is a lot more cost effective to deal with issues than a lot of these German cars. So like I kind of thought about it. I went a little bit down that path. And like there's just too much that I'm not comfortable with and not familiar enough with. So I'm going to go back to the platform that I know what I'm getting into. So what do you guys think about that?
I think another part of it too is like, even though this budget sounds like it's a lot, the Subaru kind of hits a mark where like it's in a good middle ground for a budget like this. Like, could you build a Honda for cheaper than you could build an FRS and be competitive? I think so, or like a Celica or something. But like if you have the budget, like why not? I think they're more fun. Like there's a playfulness, and then you get to like the BMW. Like, well, could you like buy like something like right up to the limit of what you're willing to spend for a budget, and then just hope nothing happens? Like, did you get that issue with like a BMW or a Cayman or a Boxster? And now you're kind of like, well, I mean, if anything goes wrong, like I'm not going to get to race this year. So I think like in addition of going with what we know, I do think that Subaru does their vehicles strike a good middle ground for what's available out there to compete in.
And like the flexibility, like you could build a car like Tasso. You have a car that is purpose built to run on dirt and gravel, rough conditions, but you took it and you still drove it at a road course at high plains and had fun with it and was still pretty darn quick. Your platform, if you wanted to, if you tried rallycross or hill climbs, you're like, you know what, this dirt thing is just not for me. You have a platform, you could then move to, okay, now let's set it up for tarmac.
Yep.
You could do that. They're very adaptable. They're very malleable. Even the FRS, like there are actually people now that are building these cars as rally cars. I mean, Nameless Performance has run it for a long time. One of our guys, Tim Whitberg, has been running his BRZ as a rally car for a number of years. Steve from Salted, the guys from Salted now have a BRZ rally car. So like all of a sudden,
Scott McCarty built his out of a salvage title too. It was cheap. You had to do work. You had to replace the sheet metal on one corner.
But it's doable.
But I would guess that his car right now fits our bill pretty comfortably. And he's in a competitive open two-wheel drive car.
Yeah.
So
And like if you're talking about a Civic or like a BMW, like those aren't as flexible for application necessarily. I think it could certainly be done, but it's not as inherently flexible as the Subaru platform is to the different disciplines like that.
I think Subaru and the older BMWs and Hondas all do a really good job with like cross compatibility, like the things that you can put into them, and like kind of like Legos where you can put them together. Like if you have an E30 or an E36 or an E46, those engines all kind of go into each other, and a lot of those parts are like, oh, I've got an E36, but I want a limited slip. Oh, look, the M3 came with a limited slip. Let me just find to use one of those.
Yep.
Where Civics are like, well, what's the current motor right now? Oh, they're putting turbocharged K20C1s. I want to put that in my EG Civic. Like those, I think, like of all the manufacturers I can think of, at least that I will call import, because I'm sure Chevrolet's like that, but they do a really good job. They've done a really good job, or the enthusiasts have done a really good job in really painting a real easy landscape to modify those cars and just make them so cross compatible.
Yep.
Like, do you want you can have a Legacy that's rear-wheel drive. You can have a Legacy that's all-wheel drive. You can have a Legacy with a V6 in it. You have a Legacy with a NA single cam slammer in it. You can have a Legacy with, a billet IAG, 1,000 horsepower setup in it. I mean, like, and that's just all Subaru stuff.
yeah.
So I mean,
But it brings up something that we've all touched on here, and something we've talked about in the past on this podcast and with each other, is that one of the best things you can do, and it's free, is to get in with a community that is doing this kind of stuff, right? Like it's saving us $50,000 to $100,000 worth of value just to have this information on the front side of stuff that we all know. And so, be a good person, come in, be humble, offer to help, and that's going to get you in good standing with, a group like the Flatirons community or like the Rally Build community and those guys.
Hill climb community.
Yeah, like the Hill climb community, because then it's not only information, like a person like me now is like, a couple of years into it. I have a stack of parts that are takeoffs or whatever just sitting in the attic of my garage. And if you're like, hey man, I'm having like a lot of trouble coming up with whatever brake discs that fit my application, I'm like, oh, I got a stack of ones. They're a little rusty, but that's just bedding compound for like the working man's bedding compound. Just a little bit of FEO too.
Yeah.
So, it's it's invaluable it's the only reason all of our builds work that we're describing right now, is because of that kind of community information.
Yeah. Well, and getting involved in the community, I mean, it's like even going to a few events, like watching what people are running. Like generally, it is not a good starting point to look at. Like, okay, well, look at this class, and everybody's running either BMWs or FRSs. Interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to pick an old Saab that I don't see anybody running. Like that's what I'm gonna build, because I just like old Saabs for some reason. Like generally, kind of trying to reinvent the wheel is not a good place to start.
All right.
Because a lot of times if there's nobody running those cars, there's a reason.
And it's something I'm also trying not to touch on here because it's too easy. Is you could buy a used car. You don't have to build
used
one.
car built to the class for sure.
Yeah, you could buy a used open light car for $7,000.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's totally valid.
And then you're in. You buy a used open light car and then buy the spares package that comes with it and just go drive to events. And now you're racing ARA rally. Buy some safety gear, spend $500 each on safety gear and get the cheap Safecraft stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And now you're racing for $10,000 at the national level.
Man,
So,
but
that's
something
too easy.
like
I didn't want to cheat and take the shortcut on this.
Well, all 69 listeners of ours will go out and buy all 10 that are available in the country.
Yeah, all two or three.
Yeah.
Looking at the used market, I mean, that is, for anything that you want to do, that's always a great place to start, because man, getting spares and having a car that is like, it's somewhat sorted, that's not a bad.
If somebody wants to buy my car and a spares package and wants to pay me $50,000, shit, Like, hell yeah.
All right. See? You can even, if you don't find what you're looking for, just go to an event and just start talking to people.
Yeah, if you show up with
Yeah, there
50
you go.
grand in your hand at Temple Canyon where I broke down, and you're like, hey man, or even give 40 grand, give yourself 10 grand to put another transmission in my broken ass car, and you threw 40 grand in my face at Temple Canyon last year, I would have taken you out for dinner also. Like, holy shit. Like,
return that investment.
Yeah.
Man. Well, as we're winding down, is there anything else, any other like key decision factors or key thoughts that you guys had as you're kind of thinking about this question or this problem that we haven't touched on yet?
Always budget more. Sorry, I know I've been talking a lot. And we're making these sweet budgets. The reality is when I make one of these budgets in real life where I count for time, I double the time and double the budget at least to get it done. And that's where my starting point. And then, my wife is still like, yeah, sounds good. So 10 times, does that sound better?
Oh, no.
So, well, but so, right. We're having fun having this conversation. It is hard work. And you're going to blow your budget no matter how good you try to stick to it, but it's still doable. Just go do it.
I think something that people need to take into consideration is half of the reason this budget thing, this conversation is coming up is because you want to go and race or go and drive. So don't blow your whole budget on building the car of your dreams and then be at the end of your budget and can't afford to go to an event. So I think we say that a lot of times. I see people get caught in that thirst trap all the time where they're like, I have to have this thing and this thing and this thing before I go out. And if you were in this lovely position where you could, like, I have 50 grand to do, let's see what they think. Definitely like try and get it done for what you have to do and then enjoy driving it. And just like, if half your budget was spent driving it, shit, that would be, awesome.
That's the goal, right? Is you do all this work so you can go out there and drive the car. You can go out there and do the thing.
And have those experiences and meet those people and go to those tracks that you've always wanted to go to. And because the experience is worth way more than 50 grand, and it's an intangible, an intangible feeling. So
almost to build on that. Go ahead, Scotty.
I was going to say the overall goal is just to find somebody to give us all $50,000 each so we can do this.
Oof, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, what I was going to say is there's an advantage, especially if you're coming into it with no experience. There's an advantage in finding something to do with your car that doesn't involve pulling out the whole interior, putting in a cage, because once you put a cage into a car, it's now a race car. Like that changes what you can do with it. Like there's so many people that we've talked to over the years that like they have a WRX or STI, they love the car, they just want to do something with it. Like find something that you can do with it with like the minimal amount of change. Kind of like even just running out with NASA or doing some of the time trial series where you don't have to put a ton of energy into the car. You can just go out there and do the event and compete or just drive, because you almost need to find what you like to do and find out that you really do like to go out there and drive the car. Like that's the first piece of the puzzle, because like I remember our second rally chassis was a car that somebody they got the car, they did the whole build on the car, they stripped it, turned it into a rally car, bought all the wheels, the tires, the spares, and all this sort of stuff. They went out, they ran 5 events. They're like, I'm done with this, and I'm out. And then they sold it to us for like pennies on the dollar because we had rolled our car. But like that's kind of your worst case scenario with going down a path like this, is like almost starting as we described starting. We're like, okay, I'm going to go buy a car, I'm going to go buy a trailer, I'm going to go buy a tow vehicle, I'm going to modify the car, I'm going to go out there and do it. And you do, and you're like, I don't like this, I hate this, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's like, well, you've just put all of that energy in this direction, and now you're going to completely change up. Like, go out there and do something and find what you like first before you even decide that, like, I want to compete, I want to do something with a car that even requires a cage. That's
there are a lot of opportunities to get involved for free, and it helps you with that process too, right? Like there's almost no rally team that wouldn't take an extra set of hands checking lug nuts and tire pressures at each service, right? So get on the Facebook groups, say, hey, looking at getting into this. Everyone's going to say, well, come volunteer and see if you like it. And you're like, yeah, I know, I got that advice already. Who needs my volunteer help? And then you'll hook up with somebody, and then you'll find out if you like the community, if you like the event, if you like the places you're going, right? It's the things you don't think about. Like, there are some places I don't like the races, not because the race is bad, but because I just think it's a lame part of the country to be in for doing that race. I'm like, well, okay, but this place isn't pretty. There's no good coffee shops here, so what am I doing here?
The drive time is too much. Like I don't have 3 days each way to drive to an event.
Yeah, and so there's places you can get involved for free, and that also still starts building that community that we've talked about a few times. That's so important.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I cut you off for like the 20th time, Ryan.
It's okay.
Well, as we're wrapping up, any other thoughts? What did you guys want to throw out there?
No.
We're
all happy to help.
Yep. If you've got questions, ask and reach out to us. Put something in the comments below. Shoot us an email, what have you, and certainly do our best to answer any questions that you might have. And keep an eye on us. We all have something in mind for 2022. Something. It might not be great, but it's something.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be a good year.
It's going to be so good. I can't wait.
Perfect. Well, I think that's as good a place to stop as any. So I will once again thank everybody for listening. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. Greatly appreciate that. Appreciate your support as always. And I guess one other thing I will throw out there is if you like the content we're putting out, like what we're talking about, feel free to suggest topics. We've started doing that a little bit, but also tell a friend. If you like this, pass it on. Anything we can do to kind of get more people interested in doing this kind of thing, interested in motorsports, or even just following what we're doing and talking about, that is greatly appreciated. So with that, I will say, thanks again. And until next time, as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.